Hi everyone, today I'm going to talk about how this class has transformed my perception of higher education. It's really interesting because before I took this class, I thought that a lot of the challenges and issues we face were relatively recent and new, but in studying the history, I actually have seen some of these issues come up from actually the very beginning of our history. So that's been really interesting and transformative for me. So I've gone through our discussion post and looked for reoccurring themes and have connected them to issues that we still talk about today. So one of the issues I'm going to discuss are our college students. So who are they and who have they always been? I feel like we always talk about them in terms of kids these days and talk about them like they have each generation has their own unique challenges, and they do, but we've been talking about students having challenges since the very beginning. I also want to talk about money and funding for higher education. This has come up a lot this semester, so it's all about the Benjamins. And I also want to talk about money in terms of cost and access in higher education, because I feel like that's a really important issue that we should talk about these days. Curriculum is another issue that I want to discuss because it's been evolving since the very beginning, and we are still debating what should college students know when they leave our institutions. I'm also going to talk about administration and faculty and beyond, so just the institution as a whole. Who's running the show or who's sinking the ship, depending on how you're looking at that. And then finally, I want to take a look at the missions and goals of institutions. I still feel like we are trying to define who we are and what we do. So first, let's talk about kids these days. So we know that with our colleges, they started out for the elite white male, but we still see a picture of college students as maybe we even sometimes currently envision them of griping about food or performing acts of rebellion, right? That typical college student that we might think of. We do see a glimmer of hope for diversity occurring in around the 1860s when we have some degrees conferred for women. HBCUs emerge as well around this time period. And then all the way up to the 1940s, we see this idea of college as a place of belonging where you have alumni events, where you have fraternities, maybe debauchery. And I still think this is how some people see the American college student today. But I would argue that we are shifting away from that, especially as we look at our recent undergraduates who are Generation Z. And then our textbook mentions that around the 20th century, we have more and more discussion about trouble in keeping up with academics. So I still feel like we are trying to have college students have this sense of belonging and tradition. And I feel like that's a wonderful thing, but we talk about it certainly in terms of retaining them and graduating them. So we know that college students who do participate and find a place to belong on campus, that they are more likely to graduate, and that's important to us. But I also feel like this is a really big challenge for our students today, especially ones who go to state institutions like the one I work at, because college students they're not that traditional student that's just focusing on school. They have full-time jobs, they have other obligations, maybe they're commuter students, and it's really tough to kind of find that sense of belonging when you're focusing on so much on finances. They do have trouble with academics and keeping up. So interestingly, the group that's coming through now, luckily we do have access to secondary education, which was not always the case in our history. But the problem with that is funding is tied to secondary education. And so we feel like a lot of our students have been pushed through that system, and then they arrive at our doorstep and they struggle. And so it's really hard for those students to keep up, and it's hard to figure out how to help them keep up as well. It can be really tough. Students today focus a lot on time. They want their degree, they want it now, they want it fast, and they want a job. And so I feel like, again, the generation of Gen Z, that's something that they have had to focus on because they've seen maybe their parents struggle, they've seen an economic recession, they've seen the housing market crisis. So they see school as that stepping stone for social mobility. And, that may not always be the case. So that can be really tough for these students. And I feel like that's a challenge that they do face. So I also want to talk about money and funding for higher education because this is a really important, all the way back to the very beginning. So with colonial universities, they had to figure out how to finance the schools without having these larger donations that the Oxfords of the world had. So they relied on smaller donations, tuition, government funding, And we've always done that. We've had to be very resourceful and imaginative since the very beginning. Around the 1900s, mid-1900s, sports emerge as funding. We also look at large foundation donations for funding and this interest in running the university like a corporate model. Money has been a driving force, and we really see around this time period the idea of should we run colleges like a business. So today we continue to fight for funding. There have been government cuts, but at the same time, we have a lot to deal with as far as money goes. So I'll talk a little bit later about administrative bloat and economics, but we're fighting to get that funding, and it's just not always easy, but it never has been. So I think we will continue to have to be innovative and resourceful when it comes to our funding. I do want to talk briefly about foundations and donations. So a recent issue for my own school has been the MTSU's Political Economy Research Institute. So we got this money for this institute, and some people are not happy about it because it is tied to the Koch brothers. So you have this is a perfect example of that conundrum where we want the money and we want it no matter what because we need it so badly. Yet what does that say as far as what obligations do we have in taking money from certain sources, and how does this tie into academic freedom? So this is the perfect example of still having those issues that we face that go all the way back even to the 1920s about we need the funding, but how should we think about it in terms of who we get that from and what that ties us to when we take that money? I also want to talk about money in terms of cost and access in higher education. So we know that we started in educating the elite, so it wasn't necessarily a big deal, but around the mid-1900s we see some big changes. So this is when we have higher education, more access to more people, and we have formula funding that's materialized. This is where standardized testing and selective admissions begin, and we also have the GI Bill, which certainly dramatically changed access to higher education. And then another big historical event is in the late 1900s when Pell Grants emerge. So we see the transition from education for the elite to mass higher education. And this is an awesome thing, but it certainly does bring about some challenges. So today I think we still struggle with access, and we know that we are still mostly reliant upon standardized testing, although hopefully this is changing. But wealthier students have more access to academic resources, which lead them to do better on these tests, which leads them to get into maybe better schools or get better scholarships. So this is still an issue for us. Also, cost is still a huge issue. I feel like this is one of the biggest issues of today is the idea of student loan debt. So students are taking out loans for school, and then they are expecting a return on it. And it's led us to question, is college really still worth it? I think it is, but at the same time, I can see where students are very concerned, where they feel like they will get a quick return on their investment, and it's just not always the case. So I feel like something has to be done about student loan debt, because if we don't, students will question more and more, is college actually worth it? I also wanted to talk a little bit about curriculum, or what students should know when they leave the university. I think we've debated this also from the very beginning. So we started very traditional with a classical curriculum and the liberal arts, but even soon after that, as far as the 1800s, we even started moving into other areas of education like medicine and law. And we've continued to diversify our disciplines. So even in the 1800s, the later 1800s, we started looking more at advanced technical education or even normal schools emerging. And then again, I feel like the big tipping point is always the mid-1900s, where presidents started selecting certain fields as being more lucrative, quite frankly. So they started tying certain disciplines to external monies. So today I feel like we focus on curriculum in terms of getting students in the door, and then they are helping us focus on what happens when we get them out the door. So I think we'll start seeing more interdisciplinary connections and majors. I think students will really want internships and field experiences so they can network and be ready when they graduate. And I think we'll continue to focus on STEM, but at the same time, I see people talking about how we want students when they graduate to have critical thinking and problem solving skills. So that's where I feel like instead of just maybe having a business degree, students would benefit from, and maybe this is biased because I come from the College of Liberal Arts, but maybe we'll see some tie-in with the liberal arts so that students are more employable when they leave. So it's not just a business degree. They can also show these very specific problem solving and critical thinking skills. And I think the focus will and should be on jobs of the future. I feel like with technology and different innovations, we have to focus on that because students don't want to graduate and then the thing they were going to school for doesn't exist anymore. We have to be ready to prepare them for the jobs of the future. All right, let's talk a little bit about who runs the show. So interestingly, from our very beginning, we were very innovative. We had a strong, an external review board and a strong central administration with a powerful president. And we've evolved the different types of institutions we have. Again, in the mid-1900s, board members are business executives, junior colleges emerge, the presidents are very powerful and business savvy, new positions come up for administrative staff and for faculty alike. So department chairs emerge, advisors emerge, and faculty are still this traditional sort of idea of sage on the stage. We also, within a very short time period, go from a shortage of faculty to the faculty job market drying up. So there's a lot of change going on as far as faculty and administration goes. I think that we are still figuring out our power balance. So we see the power shift to now we have really powerful boards. And I think that the textbook argues that maybe in terms of power of president versus boards, the boards have the power and there's not a lot of checks and balances with that. And even a lot of power in athletics, Thielen mentions in the later chapters. We are also dealing with administrative bloat. So this is a challenge too, as the colleges grow as far as what we do and what we offer, we have to be able to pay for that. And so a lot of people are very critical of the administrative bloat we have. We also have the challenges of paying faculty and making sure that they are full-time. So I know that a lot of discussion has happened recently about adjunct faculty. How do we deal with this continuous job market dry-up and have all these people who are specialists in the field, but we can't really employ them full-time to do that? I think that's been a really tough struggle for a lot of people out there. So the last thing I wanted to talk about are our missions and goals, or who we are and what we do. So we started with this idea of shaping men, right, into responsible public servants. These were wealthy people. They didn't need to get those degrees. They just needed to become leaders in America. But today, our mission is a little bit different, right? So for colleges, we want to retain and graduate students, and we want to get money for that. For students, they want to get credentialed and they want to get a job. So we're in this new global economy, and we're thinking about college in terms of that, really. A quote from the book that I really liked is, "As students change, colleges must follow." So we've been a little slow to the changes. We've had a slower response. So we have different modes of learning, like online learning, that we have to keep up with. Because if we don't, the battle is real. I've been reading a lot about for-profit colleges, and they have heavy lobbying, and they're out there arguing that we're not doing our job. So why not let them do it? I think that is a really interesting problem that we face today. And they're catering to people like maybe poorer performing students who may not be getting into our schools, or even non-traditional students, people who already have college degrees but need to keep working, but still need that degree to move up. So I think that's really interesting. I think we definitely have to focus on what our students need and really rethink what we're trying to do in order to serve those students. I think we have to focus on, as much as you may not agree, we have to think about their employment and the economics in order to really serve our students. So yes, we want to educate them and help them become responsible citizens and help them grow critical thinking skills, but we also want them to be employable when they leave. And that's just, quite frankly, the truth for today. So I learned a lot this semester. I really enjoyed speaking with everyone about these issues, and I look forward to learning more. Thank you.